Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by energy and environment reporter Breanne Deppisch. Breanne, there's this new deal, obviously, or newish deal, between Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Joe Manchin. It's going to take the form of the new reconciliation bill. Maybe not everything that climate activists wanted from Build Back Better and previous iterations of this, but there are some components of it that they might like, and the electric vehicles aspect of it is something that a lot of environmentalists are looking at. Can you talk a little bit about what's in this bill on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a number of kind of interesting ways that they kind of changed up this EV tax incentive that they had always offered a version of this in Build Back Better, but we saw really strong opposition from Manchin on some of those provisions. He said it would need like kind of a total upheaval, called some of the provisions ludicrous, and so we saw them do a really significant couple of things here. The first would be to expand the tax incentive to all North American manufacturers, not just U.S. And this was described to me by a lot of folks I spoke to this week for my reporting as just being an absolute game changer for Canada. They had been really hurt by the first Build Back Better initiative, and they were like, if this gets passed, this not only would really devastate Canada's automotive industry, but also, which does have 5 major players with a U.S. presence as well. They have parts productions facilities there, but they were like, it would also really not be in the best interests of the U.S. At a time when we are trying to look to eventually compete with China on this stage. And so I spoke to a number. It's really fascinating things that they did there, but apparently in their description, the first version of the bill had been kind of aimed at appeasing and winning over union groups and things like that, like the labor movements. Whereas this one really, because honestly, there's just different interests at stake, right? We're in a time of energy crisis. We kind of need this transition, and we really can't rely on Russia or other suppliers to kind of be our allies in this fight.
Right. So are there other aspects of this that are of interest, at least to Greens, as they watch the bill negotiations unfold? I mean, I know that the permitting reforms that Senator Manchin wants aren't part of the bill per se, but it's certainly something that he's hoping to get in exchange for letting some kind of reconciliation process finally unfold. What are some of the other things that they're looking at?
So yeah, these were a real sticking point. One of Manchin's conditions to agreeing to this bill, which was really took a lot of people in Washington and elsewhere by surprise, was permitting reform. And so his office earlier this week put out a broad list of permitting reforms that have already been, or in their description, have already been agreed to. To what extent and what exactly they'll be doing on them remains a little bit murky, but they would address everything from litigation against projects to permitting review times, which Manchin has always said he wanted to cut down, and FERC jurisdiction over interstate hydrogen infrastructure projects. Really just a bevy of things that Manchin had always, they were part of his effort to scuttle the bill last fall, his ultimately successful effort.
Yeah, and so that this, is obviously their last chance at this, or most likely their last chance at this Congress, or at least before the election, before the midterm elections.
It is. So they have a lot at stake. One thing that's been, to circle back to the EVs, I've been speaking to a number of people today that say there is one kind of sticking point that could really turn this on its head, and that is the requirement, not included in the previous bill, that would require a certain percentage of battery components and car manufacturing components to be included, to be included from the U.S., Canada, and parties of U.S. free trade agreements. They would require a certain percentage of those parts to be included in the vehicles to make them eligible for the $7,500 tax incentive. And that's something that's actually very difficult because we don't really have a supply chain in place for critical minerals. We also don't have a lot of mining or processing in North America writ large. So this is something that is highly, highly ambitious, almost to what's been described to me as almost in a way that could risk tanking that provision if they don't tweak it significantly.
So finally, Biden has been accused many times of bringing the country back to the 1970s with gas lines and inflation and things like that. But there's one key energy metric where he's brought us back to 1985. Talk a little bit about this.
Bowling for Soup comes to mind, famous song. But yes, so he basically reserves, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Stockpile, they are at their lowest point since 1985, not too long after the emergency stockpile of crude was established in the first place. That is obviously because of the massive drawdown, or the massive release that Biden ordered earlier this year, 180 million barrels of oil per day. And there was actually an interesting Treasury Department analysis released recently that said if they hadn't done that, then gas prices would have been 40 cents higher than they are right now, which, we have been seeing some relief at the pump. So
yeah, they're really touting the recent decline in gas prices.
They're really touting the recent decline, and they're really, really trying to draw that direct correlation. Although I would argue that there are many other factors at play as well.
Well, Joe Biden has been the vice president. If he brings us back to 1985, he can be the Miami vice president.
I love it.
Thank you, Breanne.
Thank you.
You can read Breanne and subscribe to our Daily on Energy newsletter at washingtonexaminer.com.